With us in studio from Holland, Michigan, is Juanita Bocanegra. She joins us today to talk about family, hard work, and the importance of education. Juanita, welcome to Feel Like You Belong.
Thank you for having me, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. In 1979, your parents came here from Mexico with their only child, a cute little girl named Juanita. First of all, what part of Mexico did they come from, and why did they come?
They came before 1979, Alan. In 1979 was the first time we came to Michigan, actually to Holland, Michigan.
Okay.
But we came to South Texas in the mid-70s. I was probably about a year old, a little under a year old. That tells you how old I am now. We lived in South Texas for the first few years. My uncles, my dad's brothers, were already migrants here in the Holland, Michigan area, working for a nursery that used to be known as Selenka Nursery. It no longer exists. So in 1979, my uncles convinced my dad to join them for a season of working out in the fields, trying to just make sure my dad had a better opportunity. And originally, that is why my dad, who's a U.S. citizen, brought Mom and I over. After I was born, he and Mom talked, and they decided that it just made better sense for them to be in the U.S. He's, like I said, a U.S. citizen. He wanted me, his only daughter, to have better opportunities. The USA is the land of opportunity, and he wanted me to have all those opportunities that he and Mom never had growing up. So looking for a better future for me is what brought him to the U.S., and looking for a better future for me is what brought him to Holland, Michigan.
So you were back for a lot of years. You were back and forth between Michigan and Texas. In our previous conversation, you talked about housing for migrant workers. Tell us a little bit about that so people have an understanding.
Sure. So the migrant housing where we first lived in 1979 is on New Holland Street, which is the northern part of Holland, Michigan. There is a beautiful golf course, Ottawa Legends, that sits there now. But I remember, I have vivid memories of that migrant camp. Across the street were some apartment complexes, and that was probably the newest migrant housing that Selenka had at the time. Because it was our first year, I'm an only child, so a relatively small family, we were not eligible to live in that bigger housing. So we lived in what is commonly known as just cement barracks. They were 10 little one studio, they called them apartments. I would not even call them, I think my living room now is probably about the size of what that entire little apartment or studio was like.
Like a single room?
Like a single room. They had no indoor bathrooms or showers within the room. There were, like I said, 2 units, 10 apartments on each side as you came into a big barn in the center. There were 5 apartments, men's and women's bathrooms, and then another set of 5 apartments. So to use the bathroom or use the facilities or take a shower, you had to leave your little home and walk down to the middle of the barracks to use the facilities and then go back. I remember my mother wrapping me in towels and blankets to carry me after a hot shower in the March when it was blowing snow sideways back into the apartment. When I say apartment, it was all cinder blocks. There was no drywall on it. On the wall that faced New Holland Street, there was a big window, and that is where my bed used to sit alongside that window. As you came in, on the side facing the fields, that was the door, and there was a smaller window there, and that's where the table was, where we had our meals. The third wall had the stove, and the fourth wall had the bed where my parents slept in. And that was it. There was no room for furniture. If anybody came to visit, they sat on the beds, or they sat on the 2 chairs by the little kitchen table.
And what was the schedule for go to Michigan, go to Texas? How did that work?
We arrived in early to mid-March, and we went back after Halloween, so it was early November. And that was that first season. My parents worked long hours, usually 10 to 12 hours a day. Back then it was 6 days a week, so Saturdays were required. Wow. 60 plus hours a week. In the snow, in the cold when it was cold, and in the heat when it was hot, and that's the way they made a living. After 1979, I started kindergarten, and my dad thought if I really want to give her a brighter future, I can't be doing something that requires her to move in the middle of the school year. So even at the early age of kindergarten, Dad said, we're going to stop migrating, we're going to stay put in Texas. They earned enough money in 1979 that they went back and bought a very small house that they ended up tearing all the walls out. It was in a very poor condition, but at the time, it was a little piece of heaven for my parents. For the first time in their life, they owned their property, their first home in the United States, and they were just delighted. I started kindergarten, and we stayed put for a couple years until we came back in 1985.
So talk about education, the importance of education for your parents.
My dad has a second grade education. My mother has a fourth grade education. My dad is the oldest of 5 brothers. My grandmother became a widow at a very early or very young age, and my dad felt the burden, the responsibility of providing for his mother and his younger siblings. So he worked out in the fields. He used to take care of some cattle for other people. He couldn't afford to own his own cattle. And whatever he brought home, that's how he supported his mother and his siblings from a very, very young age, elementary age. My mother's mother, my grandmother, also widowed. And so my mother, being the oldest daughter of the two, also felt burdened and had to do the laundry and the cooking and helping with all the chores at home, taking care of her younger brothers and her sister and her mom. So that's just the way life was in Mexico. Going back to the homes or the places where they lived, they have no electricity. To this day, there's no electricity. There's no running water.
And in what state in Mexico?
This is I'm talking about Nuevo León, Mexico, and Tamaulipas, Mexico, so the northern part of the country,
Sure.
Probably about 3.5 hours south of the border.
Mm-hmm.
When we visit, you still have to walk a distance to get your water, and when it gets dark, you light up a little lamp.
And given your parents' background with education and really deprivation thereof, that informed them about your education.
Right. So the summer between first grade and second grade, I was still learning English. I didn't speak any English until I started school because my parents are not bilingual. Mm-hmm. I remember an experience in kindergarten. We went to see Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and a good friend of mine sat next to me and translated that whole play for me when we were in kindergarten. When we went to Florida to pick strawberries, our truck broke down, and I was the only semi-bilingual person in the group. I think I was maybe 6 years old, a little under 7. I found myself translating. I had no idea what these truck parts were called. It was a wheel bearing, but I had no idea how to say that. I had my dad draw it out on a piece of paper. We were pointing. We were at a big truck stop. Really nice gentleman kind of walked us. And if you can imagine, it was a caravan of 4 families in 3 separate cars. We had an extra family with us in our car. And wherever I went with this gentleman to explain to him what was going on, the whole group of people went. So it was like a little mob moving back and forth between the store and the parking lot.
And that's often the way with immigrant families, is that the parents who are monolingual have to rely on the younger children to intermediate for them, and putting the kids sometimes in an awkward position. I want to go back to Holland, Michigan, though, because when we were talking earlier about education, you mentioned that there are a couple of educators who were really pivotal in your growing up. Can you tell us?
Yes. When we came back in the mid-'80s, I met Mr. Frank Cry. He was my 5th grade teacher. I still have coffee with Mr. Cry. Pre-COVID, I really haven't seen much of him after COVID. He lives in a facility in Holland, and they don't allow visitors. He stopped in and surprised me a couple weeks ago. He was able to sneak out and go to the farmer's market, and he stopped into my office, told the guards, "I'm here to see Juanita. She knows who I am." And of course, I went out and got him. He's in a wheelchair now. But this man turned my life around. I went from being a little kid with some dreams, but not really an expectation to do much, to believing in myself and thinking I can do whatever I want, and I'm going to do whatever I want with my life. He turned my grades around from an average student, B's, couple C's, A's scattered here and there, to straight A's. He had me teaching the rest of the class Spanish. He just gave me my slides like 2 years ago. He said, "I think you should have these transparencies." So that, along with just him talking to me and saying, just because you're a migrant, it doesn't mean that you can not have expectations. It doesn't mean you can't reach your goals, you can't achieve your dreams. You can do it. You need to believe in yourself. Then I got to middle school, and I remember being terrified of Dale Conklin, my 6th grade English teacher. Dale had a reputation for being racist and being mean. I'm here to tell you nothing could have been further from the truth. He was a man with a big heart. He took his own personal time to coach me through a national writing contest. I went to NASA, first time I ever got on a plane and left my parents. He took his own personal time, his own personal money to drive me to Lansing along with another teacher to receive awards and recognitions that my parents couldn't accompany me on because they were working in the fields. In high school, Miss Christy Bruns was my hero. She was my math teacher, pre-calc and calc, and she used to mail my assignments to me. I was a migrant all the way through my senior year. She would mail my assignments when I would go south to Texas so that I could keep up with the class. I don't know if she thought that I would be reviewing them or actually doing them, but being an only child with no cable at home, none of the technology that we have nowadays, I would come home from school and I'd find some joy in knowing I'm keeping up with my class in Michigan and I won't be behind when we go back. I did every assignment. I mailed a few back to her and the rest I would just bring back with me when I came in March. Again, I still meet with Ms. Bruns. We will have lunch next week, Wednesday, because her birthday was last week or this week, and we're going to meet, no, not next week, tomorrow. We meet for lunch.
So huge shout out to teachers who inspire us to aspire.
Teachers have made a world of difference for me.
Yeah.
Yes, I hold them near and dear to my heart. It's a profession that I don't think I could do myself. Nurses, teachers, all those personal caretakers, hats off to them.
Yeah, yeah. And fast forward, after high school, you went to GVSU.
I did.
Go Lakers. And then after that, law school.
Yes.
But you were not the typical law school student. You had 1 or 2 children at the time.
When I started law school, I had a 3.5-year-old at home and a 1.5-year-old at home. I was working full-time as a legal assistant at a law firm in Holland, Han Persinger, and I was working part-time at what used to be Old Kent Bank. It's now Fifth Third Bank. So I had a full-time job, a part-time job, a toddler, and a baby at home. My husband was a huge support. I would not have been able to do it without him and him taking care of the girls. I think he felt like a single father for those 3.5, 4 years that I was in law school.
Yeah. You had a lot of bases to cover, so teamwork is a good thing.
I did. I remember my daughter, my oldest, the baby was too young, but she'd say, "Mommy, read me a book. We want a bedtime story. Sissy and I want a bedtime story." And I'd say, I can't. I have all these cases to brief. I'd show her my big constitutional law book, and she'd say, "Well, read that." Sure put her to sleep. They listened to a lot of constitutional law or whatever class I had for that particular term.
These fond childhood memories they will have
Yes.
looking back on their bedtime stories. So we have to wrap up in just a little bit here, but you currently work in the Ottawa County Prosecutor's Office, and you're taking another step in your life. Talk about what's going on this summer and this fall.
I am. So going back to those teachers who said, don't ever hold yourself back. You can be whatever you want to be. I am currently a candidate for the 58th District Court. Years ago, people started asking me, when are you going to run for judge? And I thought, never. I'm going to retire as a prosecutor. I love what I do. Slowly, I started to kind of get curious about it and thought, well, I can still make a difference in people's lives from a different perspective from the bench. I hope I get there. If not, I still have a job that I love. I'm very blessed that way, but God willing, hopefully I will get there.
And how can people support you if they're so inclined?
Vote Juanita Bocanegra on the November ballot. I will not be on the August ballot. We will not have a primary. There's just 2 candidates for the 58th District Court. I am endorsed by Judge Jonas, who is the position that I'm seeking. Judge Jonas is retiring. So again, feel very blessed to have her support, her endorsement. I'm endorsed by the sheriff, endorsed by a lot of law enforcement. 100% of the Ottawa County commissioners endorse my boss, who's the Ottawa County prosecutor, many leaders in the community. I encourage people, if they don't know who I am, ask somebody around you or go on my web page. They can find my website or go on my Facebook and find out who's endorsing me, and I bet they will find at least 1 or 2 names that they recognize on that list.
Awesome. Take us out with this question. What do your parents think of all of this?
So unfortunately, I'm not going to cry. My mother had a stroke, serious stroke, 2 strokes, about 5 years ago. She is no longer able to live with me. She still supports me. She tells everybody at the assisted living, this is my daughter and you need to vote for her. I'm very proud of her. I know Dad is very proud of me. He lives with me. I just feel like if I get there, it's going to be really difficult, especially in the current situation, to have my mom there with me. And that means the world to me, but I know she's supporting me. I know she's praying. I said I wasn't going to cry.
That's okay. It's perfectly, is more than acceptable. It's real. And I understand that they have campaign T-shirts that they wear.
They
for
do.
you.
My mom wears it proudly, and Dad wears it once in a while because it's a pink, bright magenta pink T-shirt. And being a
Doesn't go with his
79-year-old,
wardrobe.
right, it doesn't really go with his wardrobe. But once in a while, he wears it. He wears it proudly.
He needs a lapel pin at least.
Yes.
To
I
support.
should get him probably a black T-shirt or something else that he's more likely to wear. He wears a lot of the oranges and yellows, but pink he kind of shies a little bit away from.
Well, that's understandable.
Yeah.
But what a far cry this is from those early days in those cinder block one-bedroom units. And so hooray for hard work, hooray for education.
Yes, I have worked in the fields. I've picked berries. I've picked strawberries, blueberries, oranges, but worked out in the onion fields, flipped burgers at McDonald's, worked at a Dairy Queen.
You know what it's like
I
to
know
roll
what
up your
it's like.
sleeves. Yeah,
Yes.
that's awesome. We're going to have to leave it here, but Juanita, it's just been a real joy having you here. Best of luck this fall, and absolutely stay in touch with the show.
Thank you, Alan.
You bet.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you for joining us. If you're watching on TV, stay tuned for our following segments on language and culture. If you're watching Feel Like You Belong on the internet, we hope you will share your feedback with us via our website and YouTube channel. And be sure to catch our many other stories about the dynamic immigrants making our national economy a more global market.